There are seasons when the hand of God feels less like a healer's touch and more like a wound. When his no cuts deeper than any sword, when his silence echoes louder than any answer, and the faith that once felt like fire now feels like frost. And yet, it is there, in that raw ache of confusion, that grace begins its most secret work. Because divine love is not sentimental, it is surgical. It does not exist to protect our comfort, but to purify our hearts. Jonathan Edwards once said that God's love is not content to leave us as we are, because his purpose is not our peace, but our perfection. And sometimes perfection requires pain. The believer cries, "Lord, why did you take it? Why did you close that door? Why did you let me bleed?" And heaven answers softly, "Because I love you too much to let you live unhealed." The paradox of grace is this: the same hand that wounds us is the hand that holds us. The same voice that says no is the voice that whispers, "Trust me." The same fire that burns our idols is the fire that warms our faith. Look at Hebrews chapter 12, verse 6. "For the Lord disciplines the one he loves, and chastises every son whom he receives." It is not cruelty, it is confirmation. Every divine discipline is a declaration of belonging. Every unanswered prayer is a letter of adoption written in invisible ink. When God says no, he is not denying us joy, he is redefining it. Because joy that depends on circumstance is counterfeit, but joy that survives disappointment is eternal. We are quick to thank him for mercy that comforts. But what of the mercy that corrects? What of the grace that restrains? What of the love that takes before it gives? There is a holy violence in God's tenderness, a willingness to wound, so that healing might go deeper than our pride. He will tear down the altar we built to our own will, just to rebuild it on his. It was this holy severity that Edwards called the furnace of sanctification. He believed that God's love burns like a refiner's fire, consuming not the believer, but the impurities that cling to him. He wrote, "The flames of affliction are but the breath of his mercy, purging the dross that would dim his reflection in the soul." If you are walking through a loss today, if something dear has been taken, if heaven seems silent, if your prayers return unanswered, know this: you are not being ignored. You are being invited to trust in a love that is wiser than your desires, invited to rest under a hand that wounds to heal, because grace is not always the balm that soothes. Sometimes it is the blade that sanctifies. And though the cut is deep, the surgeon never misses the mark. So do not mistake pain for punishment or silence for absence. In both, the Spirit is near, cutting, cleansing, creating something you cannot yet see. For every no of God hides a greater yes that only eternity will reveal. Psalm 119, verse 71 says, "It was good for me that I was afflicted, that I might learn your statutes." Affliction is a strange tutor, but it is faithful. And when its lesson ends, the soul stands cleaner, softer, more alive than before. So when grace hurts, when love wounds, remember, the hand that holds the scalpel also bears the scar. And the wound that bleeds you today may one day be the place where his glory shines through. If this truth is speaking to your heart, comment below with your city and country. Let us see where this message of holy grace is reaching today. There is a kind of mercy that gives, and another that denies. The first fills the hands, the second empties them, and yet both are grace. The mercy that denies is the one that most offends the flesh. It is the moment when God closes the door you prayed would open, when the path you begged to walk ends at a wall built by his own hand. You stand there in disbelief, whispering, "Lord, how can this be love?" But divine love does not serve our expectations. It sanctifies them. It refuses to endorse the idols we baptize as answers. It will not bless what would blind us. Jonathan Edwards wrote, "God's denials are not the withdrawal of his favor, but the reformation of our desires." He understood that the refusal of heaven is sometimes its greatest tenderness, because the gift you lost might have become the God you worshipped. And so the Almighty, who will have no rivals for your affection, takes back what your heart began to love more than him. It is not cruelty, it is covenantal jealousy. He loves you too fiercely to let your soul be enslaved by anything less than himself. When God says no, it is never revenge. It is redemption. He frustrates the plans that would destroy you quietly. He wounds the pride that would harden you eternally. He blocks the road to Egypt so you can find the wilderness where his glory appears. Look at John chapter 15. Verse 2. Every branch that bears fruit he prunes, that it may bear more fruit. Pruning feels like loss, but it is love disguised as pain. The vine dresser's knife never slips. He cuts only what would limit the harvest. And when the branch bleeds, it is only proof that life still runs through it. Many believers cry out, "Why would you take this, Lord? It was good." And heaven answers, "Because even good things become dangerous when they replace me." God's no is often his greatest kindness. He will tear down what you thought was essential to show you what is eternal. He will deny what you wanted most to give you what you needed most, himself. We learn this not in victory, but in deprivation. Not when he multiplies, but when he subtracts. For in subtraction, the soul is stripped enough to see clearly. Edwards compared this mercy to the refining of silver. He wrote, "The Lord keeps the soul in the furnace until he sees his own image reflected there. Then he knows the work is done." That is the meaning of holy denial. It is not rejection, but reflection. The no of God is never empty. It is always aimed at glory. When you lose what you loved, do not curse the heavens. The one who closed the door still stands on the other side, holding the key. You cannot yet see the room he's preparing, but he knows its walls are safer for your soul than the one you begged to enter. Every disappointed dream, every unanswered prayer, every blocked road, these are the fingerprints of mercy in disguise. The cross itself was God's no to comfort and his yes to redemption. And the Son who prayed, "Let this cup pass," drank it instead, so that every cup we drink now might heal us rather than condemn us. So when grace denies you, it is not distance, it is design. When God takes something from you, it is because he intends to replace it with himself. And when he says no, it is never silence. It is the sound of eternity rearranging your heart. If you have ever faced God's no and later saw his mercy behind it, share your story in the comments. Your testimony may help someone else endure their pruning with faith. There comes a moment in every believer's life when God stops arguing and starts undoing. When his hand no longer comforts but constrains. When the gentle shepherd becomes the relentless potter, pressing the clay until the form he imagined appears. This is the collision between human desire and divine sovereignty, the breaking point where true surrender begins. Jonathan Edwards once wrote, "Grace is not the approval of man's will, but the conquest of it, and that is where love becomes severe. For God's tenderness is not weakness. It is a force strong enough to shatter pride. He breaks us not to humiliate, but to heal the fracture of self-worship. Because sin is not merely doing wrong, it is wanting to be God. We pray, 'Lord, let your will be done.' But what we often mean is, 'Let your will look like mine.' So grace answers, 'No.' And in that no, everything false begins to fall apart. The hand that blesses also bruises, because only the bruised can be filled. The unbroken remain proud, and pride cannot carry glory. Look at Genesis chapter 32. Jacob wrestled through the night until the Lord touched his thigh and left him limping. That limp became the mark of his new name, Israel, the man who had seen God and survived by surrender. He walked differently from that day, not because he was weaker, but because he was finally free. So too, the grace that wounds us gives us a limp of holiness, a weakness that tells the world, "I no longer walk in my own strength." This is the hidden beauty of divine discipline. It is not the destruction of the will, but its redirection. It teaches us to say with Christ in Luke 22, verse 42, "Not my will, but thine be done." When Jesus said those words, the cup did not disappear. He still drank it. Because grace does not cancel the cross. It transforms it into redemption. The believer must learn the same surrender, to see the wound not as abandonment, but as an invitation to deeper fellowship with the crucified. For every breaking in us echoes his breaking for us. Every no we receive bears the fingerprint of the one who once said, "Father, forgive them." Jonathan Edwards called this the grace of humiliation, the moment when the soul realizes that God's highest love is often hidden in our lowest valleys. He wrote, "He who would rise with Christ must first descend into himself, until every false foundation is found and overturned. That descent is painful. It feels like loss, like failure, like being forgotten. But in truth, it is the descent of gold into the furnace, the place where impurities melt and the true image begins to appear. When God breaks your will, he is not erasing you. He is engraving his likeness where yours once stood. He is dismantling the empire of self so the kingdom of heaven can reign within. It may look like defeat, but it is deliverance. It may sound like silence, but it is a song of sovereignty, a melody that only the crushed can hear. And when you rise again, you will speak differently. You will love differently. You will pray not for relief, but for refinement. You will thank him not for what he gave, but for what he took, because what he removed was what you could not survive keeping. So if you find yourself wrestling tonight, if his hand feels heavy, if his silence feels unbearable, remember Jacob's limp and remember the cross. The wound is not the end, it is the beginning of holiness. If you've ever been broken by God, only to find healing in his hands, write in the comments, "He broke me, and I'm grateful." Your confession may remind someone that pain is not proof of God's absence, it is evidence of his pursuit. It is one thing to believe that God is love. It's another to feel that love while your world is burning. Most believers can trace the hand of God in blessings, but few can recognize his heart in the breaking. Yet it is often in the breaking that his face becomes clearest. Suffering is not the opposite of grace. It is the stage on which grace is revealed. The same fire that blinds the proud becomes light for the humble. The same storm that terrifies the flesh teaches the soul to walk by faith. Jonathan Edwards called this the strange mercy of affliction, the paradox, where pain unmasks the counterfeit gods we loved and drives us back to the one who alone can satisfy. He wrote, "God permits our comforts to perish, that our faith might live. There are moments when everything you depended on begins to crumble. You pray, but heaven seems made of brass. You serve, but your strength runs dry. You love, but love is not returned. And in the echo of that emptiness, you begin to see the truth. You had mistaken the gifts for the giver. Pain is God's way of removing the fog. When he allows the world to disappoint you, it is because he intends to become your world." Look at Psalm 51, verse 17. "The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and a contrite heart. O God, you will not despise. He does not despise brokenness. He dwells in it." Brokenness is not a flaw to be fixed, but an altar to be filled. Every tear, every scar, every unanswered question can become a vessel of his presence. We learn through pain what comfort could never teach us, that God's nearness is not measured by ease, but by endurance. That the truest love is not the one that shields from suffering, but the one that sustains through it. Think of Mary at the foot of the cross. The angel who once said, "You are blessed among women," did not return to explain the nails. Heaven was silent, but not absent. The love that had once spoken now bled before her eyes. And that was grace, terrible, glorious grace. So it is with us. God's love sometimes looks like loss because he loves us beyond time. He loves us not for our comfort, but for our conformity, that we might be made like his Son. And likeness to Christ always passes through the fire. Edwards compared affliction to the chisel in the sculptor's hand. He said, "Every blow is the proof of a design, and the stone that feels most struck is the one being most shaped. So, do not despise the blows. They are the rhythm of redemption. Each strike is mercy in disguise, a love so deep it refuses to leave you unformed. The grace that hurts is not reckless. It is precise. It cuts only where corruption hides. It exposes not to shame but to cleanse. And when it seems you have lost everything, what remains is what you were always meant to keep, Christ Himself. When the fever of affliction passes, you will find that you did not die, only your idols did. And in their ashes, something new will grow, a peace that pain cannot touch and joy that circumstances cannot steal. For those who endure, the wound becomes a window. Through it, light enters, fierce, holy, redeeming. And one day you will look back on the scar and whisper, "That is where He loved me most," because the truth is simple and terrible and beautiful all at once. Every wound from His hand carries the shape of a cross. If you've ever found God's love inside your pain, share this message. Someone near you may be confusing their wounding for rejection, when it may, in truth, be their healing. There is a moment when suffering stops being a question and becomes worship, when the soul no longer asks why, but who, when the pain that once seemed meaningless begins to burn with a hidden purpose, and praise starts to rise from the ashes, the saints of old called this the miracle of the broken. Hallelujah, the song that cannot be sung in comfort, only in crucifixion. Jonathan Edwards wrote, "The purest praise is that which rises through tears, for it has passed through the furnace of love and come forth refined." At first, pain silences us. We recoil, we protest, we reason. But slowly the Spirit teaches us to breathe again, not with words of complaint, but with wonder. The same lips that trembled in sorrow begin to whisper gratitude, not because the wound is gone, but because God is near. Look at Habakkuk chapter 3, verse 17. "Though the fig tree shall not blossom, neither shall fruit be in the vines, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation." This is not denial. It is defiance. The faith that sings in famine, the adoration that refuses to die in drought. It is the soul's declaration that God is worthy, even when life is not kind. Such worship terrifies hell, because every time a wounded believer lifts their voice, the powers of darkness lose the argument that pain can separate us from love. Each hallelujah born in hardship becomes a prophecy. The cross still triumphs. Edwards described this as the grace that glorifies through affliction. He said, "When the saint blesses God for his scourge, the heavens behold a beauty greater than any created glory." That is what happens when grace finishes its work. Complaint turns to confession. Fear turns to faith. Wounds turn to worship. The believer begins to see that pain was never punishment, but participation, the fellowship of Christ's suffering. Philippians chapter 3, verse 10, "That I may know Him, and the power of His resurrection, and the fellowship of His sufferings." To know Christ fully is to suffer with Him faithfully, and in that fellowship the wound becomes holy ground. So the soul, once trembling, now lifts its hands, not because it understands everything, but because it trusts the one who does. The tears remain, but they sparkle with glory. The scar remains, but it shines like a seal of belonging. The fire has not gone out, it has changed color. It no longer burns in rebellion, it burns in reverence. And that is worship, not the sound of music, but the posture of surrender. When you begin to praise through pain, you discover something unspeakable, that joy is not the absence of sorrow, but the presence of someone greater than it. And that someone walks with you in the flame. Even now, he whispers, "I was wounded too." The cross becomes your interpreter. Every lash, every thorn, every nail declares, "I hurt so you could heal. I died so your death could become life." And when you realize that, gratitude is no longer optional. It erupts, unstoppable. From the wound rises worship. From the ashes rises adoration. And from the heart that was once shattered rises a song that will never end. Blessed be the name of the Lord. If you've learned to praise God through pain, write in the comments, "My wound became worship." Your testimony will remind someone that the fire they fear may be the very place where glory begins. There is a point when the bleeding stops, not because the pain has vanished, but because purpose has entered. The wound no longer speaks of loss. It speaks of love. The scar becomes not a reminder of what was taken, but of what was given through the taking. Grace, when it finishes its hidden work, always leaves a mark. The healed carry holy evidence, scars that shine like parables. They are not decorations of survival, but declarations of redemption. Jonathan Edwards once wrote, "The saints' scars are the handwriting of grace, the record of a God who does not heal by hiding, but by transforming. In the beginning, we begged God to remove the pain. Now, having passed through it, we beg him never to remove the memory, because the scar has become sacred. It is proof that the flame did not consume, it refined. That the cross we feared became the crown we now bear." Look at John chapter 20, verse 27. Jesus shows his hands and side to Thomas. He does not erase the wounds of Calvary. He glorifies them. The resurrected Christ still bears scars. Perfection remembers pain, not to relive it, but to redeem it, and so must we. The believer who has suffered deeply is not ruined. He is radiant, for the same grace that cuts also consecrates. When we rise from trial, we carry pieces of heaven stitched into our flesh. Your story, your loss, your heartbreak, they are not random chapters. They are verses in the larger song of His mercy. The scar is not the evidence of God's distance. It is the signature of His nearness. You may not realize it yet, but the very pain you thought would destroy you has made you capable of compassion. You can now touch others without judgment, speak comfort without pride, love without fear, because you know what it means to be held by invisible hands in the dark. Edwards called this the sanctified memory of affliction. He wrote, "Grace redeems not only the soul, but its story. The events that once accused us become the witnesses that justify His goodness. This is why Paul could boast in his weakness. This is why Joseph could forgive his brothers. And this is why you too can look at your scars and say, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good." Genesis 50, verse 20. When grace transforms your suffering, it doesn't erase the pain of the past, it reinterprets it. The cross is still a cross, but it has become an instrument of resurrection. The scar remains, but now it tells the truth. Love was here. What once silenced your worship now fuels it. What once shattered you now shapes you. What once broke your confidence now builds your faith. Because you have seen that the grace which wounds also walks with you until you are whole. Do not despise your scars, beloved. They are not proof of failure. They are evidence of faithfulness. They are the ink God uses to write the testimony of the healed. And when others see those marks upon your life, they will not pity you. They will praise the one who brought beauty from the breaking. So wear your scars like armor, not shame. Tell their story, not with pride, but with peace. For every healed place in you is a doorway for someone else to find hope. The wound has closed. But the message continues. Grace does not forget. It glorifies. If God has turned one of your wounds into a testimony, write in the comments, "My scar tells His story." Your confession may help someone else believe that the same hand that wounded can also restore. When grace completes its work, the soul that once bled begins to bleed for others. Those who have been wounded by love become instruments of healing. The fire that once purified now passes from heart to heart, not as wrath, but as warmth. Because true healing never ends with the healed. It flows outward as mercy learned through pain. You cannot touch the hands of the great physician and remain indifferent to the suffering of his patients. Jonathan Edwards wrote, "The heart that has been melted by grace will never again be content to watch others burn in silence." When you have walked through affliction with God, your vocabulary changes. You stop offering quick answers and start offering quiet presence. You learn to sit beside the broken without fixing them, because you remember that God did not fix you. He formed you. That is why He allows His saints to suffer, not to crush them, but to commission them. Suffering is the seminary of compassion. The scarred become shepherds. The humbled become healers. Look at 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 3 and 4. Blessed be the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our tribulation, that we may be able to comfort those who are in any trouble with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God. Every trial has a twin. Somewhere, someone is enduring what you survived. And when you speak from your scars, their silence breaks. When you tell your story, their shame begins to melt. Because healing, like fire, spreads when shared. Edwards called this the communion of suffering. He wrote, "The saints are joined not merely in doctrine, but in pain. Their fellowship is not founded in joy alone, but in the likeness of wounds redeemed. And so the church becomes not a hall of the flawless, but a hospital of the healed. Each scar is a testimony, each tear is a sermon, each embrace is a sacrament of mercy. This is what the world cannot understand, that the power of Christianity is not triumph, but tenderness. The gospel conquers not by pride, but by compassion, born of pain. It is through the wounded that Christ continues his ministry. When you look at your scars and feel the old ache, remember, they are the fingerprints of purpose. God could have healed you in secret, but he left the mark visible so others could find the same path home. Even Jesus, resurrected in glory, kept his wounds, because healing is not the erasure of pain, it is the redemption of it. He shows his hands not to display victory, but to invite belief. And now he calls you to do the same, to show the world that holiness and humanity are not enemies, that weakness is no longer a curse, but a calling. The grace that hurt you has now made you a vessel of comfort. You carry in your soul a sacred medicine distilled from tears. And when you pour it out, heaven recognizes its own fragrance. So go, find the hurting, the doubting, the ones still wrestling with their no. Sit beside them. Do not preach at them, be the sermon. Let your scars speak, I have been where you are, and he was there too. Because in the end, that is what healing means, to become a reflection of the healer himself. Grace does not simply restore, it reproduces. The love that wounded now works through you. The comfort you received becomes the calling you live. If God has ever used your pain to comfort someone else, write in the comments, "My healing has a mission." Your story could be the balm that lifts another soul from despair to devotion. Every pain endured in faith becomes a seed of holiness. The field of suffering that once seemed barren begins to bloom with fruit that cannot grow in comfort. Because the grace that hurts is not aimless, it cultivates eternity inside time. Jonathan Edwards called this the sanctifying flame. He wrote, "The furnace of affliction is the workshop of the soul. There the Lord fashions saints, and each spark of pain becomes a jewel of eternity. Holiness is not a sudden crown, placed on the head of the believer. It is a slow engraving upon the heart, done by the steady hand of grace through every trial endured. Each loss, each frustration, each unanswered prayer presses his image deeper into us, and the result is something impossible to counterfeit. A soul that reflects God not just in doctrine, but in endurance. It has walked through the fire and found the refiner faithful. Look at 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 6 and 7. Though now for a little while, if necessary, you have been grieved by various trials, so that the tested genuineness of your faith, more precious than gold that perishes though it is, tested by fire, may be found to result in praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ. This is the mystery. Holiness is not comfort preserved, but character produced, and God uses pain as his engraving tool. Every believer who endures affliction without losing worship becomes a living proof that the gospel is real. Edwards believed that sanctification is the visible miracle of salvation, not the avoidance of suffering, but the transformation of it into likeness with Christ. He wrote, "When grace has finished its perfect work, the saint's greatest grief will become his brightest garment." That is the work of the Spirit, to turn sorrow into sanctity, wounds into worship, and trials into treasures. But holiness has a fragrance that the world does not recognize. It smells like humility, it sounds like forgiveness, it looks like peace that doesn't make sense. It is not loud, not triumphant, it is luminous, quiet fire, glowing in a heart that has stopped resisting and started resting. You see, heaven values not what we escape, but what we endure with faith. The crowns of glory are not given for comfort, but for constancy. Those who shine brightest, there are those who burned longest here. When you reach that place, when the hurt no longer haunts, when you can look at your past and see providence, instead of punishment, you will realize that holiness was being born all along. The fire that frightened you was midwifing eternity in you. Romans chapter 8 verse 28 says, "And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good." But Edwards would add, "The good is not what we imagine, but what He is making of us." The grace that wounds has one goal, to make us like Christ. And likeness to Christ always bears the mark of crucifixion before it carries the crown. There is no resurrection light without the shadow of a cross. So if you are still walking through pain, take heart, you are walking through the very fire that forges saints. You are being sculpted into the image of glory, and one day, when you stand before Him, every scar will shine like gold. Holiness is not what He takes from you, but what He gives through the taking, and when the last tear falls, you will see that every one of them was watering the garden of your eternity. If God has ever used pain to make you more like Christ, comment below, "The fire made me holy." Your confession will remind others that suffering is not the end, it's the beginning of glory. There is a point where pain ceases to be explanation and becomes revelation, where the believer finally sees not what was taken, but who remained. The grace that once felt like cruelty is unmasked as compassion. The fire that once terrified is now recognized as the very presence of God. Jonathan Edwards described this moment as the unveiling of love. He wrote, "When the soul perceives that the flames were never punishment but purification, the terror of holiness gives way to the worship of beauty. It is the instant when your theology becomes sight. The same wounds that made you weep now make you worship, because you realize that grace was never working against you. It was working in you." This is what 2 Corinthians chapter 4 verse 17 means, "For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, works for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory." What if the weight you feel is not punishment, but preparation? What if the pain you begged God to remove is the very tool He's using to make you radiant? The furnace that refines gold does not ask the metal's permission. It simply burns until the reflection appears. And the refiner never leaves the flame unattended. He stands beside it, watching, waiting, whispering, "Just a little longer." The image is almost there. This is the climax of grace, the revelation that what hurt you most has become what makes you holy. You see it now, how every closed door, every sleepless night, every unanswered prayer was God's fierce kindness, dismantling your illusions of control. Edwards believed that sanctified suffering was the soul's final education. He wrote, "When the saints enter glory, they will thank God more for their crosses than their comforts, because the cross teaches us what comfort never could. That divine love does not protect us from suffering. It transforms suffering into sight. In that light, even your regrets are redeemed. The wounds that once accused you become the witnesses that testify to His mercy. You can look back without bitterness and say, 'He was there, even there.' Think of Moses at the burning bush. He turned aside because something painful was aflame, but not consumed. So it is with us. We turn aside from our suffering only to discover God within it. The grace that wounds to heal also burns to glorify. One day, every believer will stand before that same fire, and those who have walked through it on earth will not fear it in heaven, for they have already been refined. The flames that once tested will now crown. The light that once exposed will now embrace. This is what Paul meant when he said, "Christ in you, the hope of glory." Glory is not simply a destination. It is the revelation of what grace has made of you. Every scar, every loss, every tear, woven into a tapestry of light. So when you stand before God, you will not come empty-handed. You will bring the gold of endurance, the silver of surrender, and the diamonds of devotion forged in pain. And he will look upon you and say, "Well done, faithful servant. The fire has done its work." Then you will understand that the grace that hurt was the same grace that healed, and the love that wounded was the same love that glorified. And you will fall at his feet, not in confusion, but in awe, and every why you ever whispered will dissolve into worship. If you've begun to see God's purpose in your pain, write in the comments, "The fire was love." Let the world know that the wounds of grace are not marks of wrath, but signs of redemption. When all is said and done, when the fire cools, when the tears dry, when heaven itself explains what earth could not, we will stand in awe before a love we never understood, a love that refused to indulge our comfort because it was busy saving our souls. Jonathan Edwards once said that God's greatest mercy is his refusal to let us be satisfied with anything less than himself. And now we see it clearly. Every wound, every delay, every unanswered prayer was that mercy at work. The story of grace is not the tale of the unhurt. It is the redemption of the wounded. It is the record of a God who does not heal from afar, but enters the furnace himself. Christ did not stand outside the fire commanding us to endure. He stepped into it and whispered, "Follow me through. Look again at the cross." That is where grace and pain became one. The hands that formed galaxies were pierced by nails. The lips that spoke life cried out in thirst. And the heart that never sinned broke so that ours could be made whole. If ever you doubt that your suffering has purpose, look to the man of sorrows and remember, God's love is not proven by how little you suffer, but by how deeply he suffered to make you his. The same Jesus who healed the blind also wept. The same Savior who raised the dead also bled. Because love that does not enter pain cannot redeem it. That is the secret the saints knew, that holiness is born not from ease, but from encounter. They learned to bless the breaking, to worship through wounds, to say with Job, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust him." Job chapter 13, verse 15. And now, centuries later, their voices echo through time. Don't run from the fire. Don't despise the wound. The hand that hurts you is the hand that holds you, and the scar you carry will one day shine like glass beneath his glory. Edwards believed that every saint's story ends in a single word: wonder. He wrote, "Heaven is the eternal surprise of seeing that every pain was purpose, every loss was love, and every tear was turned into treasure. So when the day comes and the veil lifts, you will not ask why anymore. You will weep, not from sorrow, but from sight. And you will say, 'Now I know.' Every no was grace. Every silence was love. Every wound was healing me. And the Lord will answer, 'Yes, I wounded you to win you. I denied you to deliver you. I broke you to bless you. I hurt you only to make you whole.' Then the last pain will end, and the last fire will fade, and what will remain is the pure, untouchable joy of a soul refined, no longer afraid of the flame, because it has become light itself. So let the grace that hurts have its way. Do not resist the hands that remake you. You are not being ruined, you are being resurrected. And the same fire that once burned will one day shine through you forever. If this message has spoken to your heart, share it. Someone near you may be standing inside their own fire, and they need to hear that the flame is not judgment. It's grace in disguise. Comment below with your reflections, your city, and your country, so we can see how far this testimony of holy love is reaching. And if your soul longs for messages that awaken reverence, that refine faith, and reveal the God who still walks with his people through the fire, subscribe to the Standard of Truth, Jonathan Edwards, and join us in this journey toward a faith that can still burn, and yet